10 years after her brother's death, Piper Hart receives a letter. The man responsible is free. He's rebuilt his life. She never got the chance. When fate places her in his path again, Piper must choose forgiveness or something far darker. Hello family, welcome to Storytime with Imzi. Please subscribe and like, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Rain drummed steadily against the kitchen window, soft and persistent like a memory that wouldn't let go. The morning light struggled to seep through the gray clouds outside, casting the room in a dim haze. Piper stood barefoot on the cold tile floor, wrapped in a sweater too big for her, cradling a chipped mug of coffee that had long gone lukewarm. The silence of the house was comforting, until the doorbell rang. She froze. The mail usually came later. And no one ever rang the bell anymore, not here. Not since Daniel died. Piper set the mug down slowly, deliberately, as if rushing would shatter the fragile calm she'd constructed over the years. When she opened the door, a thin man in a postal uniform handed her a single envelope. No packages, no bulk. Just a letter. Department of Corrections was stamped across the front. Her breath caught. The envelope trembled in her hand as she shut the door. She didn't open it right away. She stood by the sink, tracing the edge with her thumb, her reflection faint in the window glass. She already knew what it said. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach, the way animals sense storms before they break. She opened it. This is to notify you that Caleb Royce has been released from Ridge Hill Correctional Facility, having served the full term of his sentence. Her eyes skimmed, landed on rehabilitated, then again on released. Her grip tightened. The paper crinkled slightly in her hand. She walked to the living room and sank into the armchair Daniel used to tease her about. "You're way too young to have a favorite chair, Pipes," and stared at the fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. 10 years. 10 years of trying to breathe through the grief. Of therapy and apologies and statements in courtrooms. 10 years of trying to forgive the man who had taken her brother's life in a drunk driving accident. And now, just like that, he was free. Piper read the letter again. She imagined Caleb walking down some quiet street with the sky wide open above him, breathing fresh air, laughing, maybe even forgetting. Her fists clenched, her jaw locked. Forgiveness had always been a choice, one she'd tried to reach for but could never quite grasp. And now, that option felt buried under the weight of his freedom. She didn't cry. She stood, walked to the kitchen, and pinned the letter to the corkboard beside the calendar. A small square marked with her brother's birthday circled in faded ink. Then she picked up her phone and opened a blank search bar. Caleb Royce, post-prison life. The rain kept falling. But inside Piper, something had begun to rise. The graveyard sat on the edge of town, where the land sloped gently and the wind always carried the scent of pine and damp earth. Piper had avoided it for the better part of a year, telling herself Daniel wouldn't care, that he'd understand. But this morning, she woke before sunrise with a need in her chest that felt more like a wound than a calling. She parked near the entrance and walked the rest of the way. The grass was slick with dew, and the soles of her boots whispered as they moved through it. Daniel's grave was easy to find. Even now, she could have walked there blindfolded. Daniel Michael Hart, the stone read. 1991 to 2015. The brightest stars burn the fastest. Her mother had chosen the quote. Piper had wanted something else, something simpler. But she didn't argue then. She barely spoke. The days after Daniel's death blurred into a static hum. She only started to recover from once the trial began. She crouched and brushed away a few leaves that had settled along the base of the marker. Her fingers hesitated on the carved letters. Touching them always made it feel real in a way her mind still fought against. "I'm sorry I haven't been here," she murmured. The wind rustled through the trees in reply. "I got a letter," she said. "He's out. Caleb Royce. Just gone. Free." She expected anger to boil up, sharp, immediate. But what she felt instead was emptiness, like someone had scooped the marrow out of her bones. Her hands curled into fists. "They say he's rehabilitated. That he served his time. Like time fixes things." A bird called out from a branch above. The sound felt too alive, too bright for the heaviness in her chest. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. Probably her mom. She hadn't told her about the letter yet. Not because she couldn't, but because she already knew what her mother would say. Let it go, Piper. You've survived. That's enough. Forgiveness isn't for him, it's for you. But Piper didn't want healing if it meant forgetting. She didn't want peace if it came with pretending Caleb hadn't shattered their family like glass. She stood slowly, brushing the damp from her knees, and stared down at the stone one last time. I'm not done, she whispered. I don't think I've ever been done. As she turned back toward the car, she pulled out her phone and opened the search results she'd found last night. The second link showed a photo of Caleb, taken at a community center. He stood in front of a mural of painted handprints, smiling, surrounded by teenagers. Caleb Royce, youth mentor. Her thumb hovered over the image. Something twisted in her. Not rage, clarity. Like the moment before a match strikes, when everything is still, just before the flame. She saved the photo. Then she got in her car, started the engine, and drove home with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. 3 states and 600 miles later, Piper reached the town Caleb Royce now called home. It wasn't much, just a scatter of brick buildings, wide roads with faded center lines, and a gas station that doubled as a diner. The kind of place where everyone knew your name by the second coffee refill. She parked outside a small motel with peeling paint and a blinking vacancy sign that hummed like a dying insect. The woman at the front desk asked no questions. Piper signed in under a false last name and paid in cash. She kept her hood up and her voice low. Just another tired traveler. But she wasn't tired. She was electric. In the mirror above the motel sink, her reflection looked back with eyes that didn't blink long. Hair tied back, jaw tight, skin pale beneath the yellowed light. Her brother used to say she looked dangerous when she was thinking too hard. Right now, she looked like someone who hadn't stopped thinking in years. The community center wasn't hard to find. A clean, renovated space on the edge of a low-income neighborhood, its walls painted with cheerful slogans and children's art. The front door stood open. Laughter spilled out. Inside, she could see teens tossing a basketball in a gym, volunteers handing out sandwiches, and a bulletin board filled with flyers. Job training, free therapy, youth mentorship. His name was on one of them. Caleb Royce, program lead. Tuesdays through Saturdays. Office in the East Wing. She stood there for a long time before stepping inside. No one questioned her. She introduced herself as a freelance writer doing a piece on post-incarceration rehabilitation programs. A volunteer with kind eyes said they'd be thrilled for the exposure. Caleb loves talking about his work. He'll be in soon. Piper nodded and smiled politely. Her stomach churned. She didn't have to wait long. 10 minutes later, he walked in wearing jeans, a hoodie, and a grin that seemed too natural for someone who had ever known true remorse. He moved like someone who belonged, who had earned back a place in the world. And when they were introduced, Piper extended her hand with a journalist's practiced poise. Piper Nash, she said. I really appreciate you making time. He took her hand and smiled. Caleb Royce. Always happy to talk about second chances. The handshake lingered half a second too long. He didn't recognize her. That, more than anything, stung. She nodded, keeping her expression neutral. Second chances, she echoed, her voice steady. That's exactly what I want to understand. He offered her a seat in his small, sunlit office. Papers and folders were stacked neatly on the desk. A child's crayon drawing was pinned to a corkboard. She took it all in while he fetched them both coffee. It was disarming how normal he seemed. How long have you been here? She asked, sipping slowly. Almost 2 years, he said. Hard to believe sometimes. When I first got out, I didn't think anyone would give me the time of day. But this place, it gave me more than I deserved. Piper smiled, a quiet, brittle thing. And as he spoke about his work, his past, the kids he mentored, she listened. Not because she cared, but because every word was a puzzle piece. She was building something. He didn't mention Daniel. Not once. And that told her everything. When she left, the sun was just beginning to dip behind the trees. She stood by her car, letting the air cool her flushed skin. Somewhere deep in her chest, something smoldered. It wasn't grief anymore. It was something far more focused. A match had struck. Now it was time to burn. The act came easier than she expected. Piper showed up at the community center twice a week, notebook in hand, questions at the ready. The staff welcomed her like an old friend. One even brought her tea on her second visit. She told them she was profiling redemption stories for a human interest blog. They called her thoughtful, passionate, but everything she wrote was a lie. Caleb met with her regularly now, sometimes in his office, sometimes out on the shaded bench behind the center where the kids smoked cigarettes when they thought no one was watching. He spoke with the sincerity of someone trying to leave a stain behind. Piper played the part of the fascinated writer, asking just the right questions. She even laughed once. It surprised her, and that made her furious. One afternoon, he handed her a paper-stapled packet, his old parole paperwork. "If you want the full picture," he said, "you might as well read it from the source." She took it, thanked him. She didn't read it. She was too busy searching the building for hidden places, for the angles no one noticed. She found a window left cracked near the janitor's closet. She tested the locks on his filing cabinet when he left the room for a phone call. She mapped his schedule in her mind, memorized the layout of the halls, the time it took for the cleaning crew to make their rounds. Her brother would have hated this, how calculated she'd become. But he was gone, and this was all that was left. Caleb opened up more with each meeting. He told her about his work with a teenage boy named Aaron who'd been arrested twice before 16. "He reminds me of who I might have been," Caleb said. "If I hadn't, well." Piper raised an eyebrow. "If you hadn't?" He paused. For a moment, his gaze turned inward, as if he were peeling back a layer he wasn't sure he wanted her to see. "If I hadn't made the choices I did. Not if I hadn't killed your brother. Not if I hadn't taken a life. Just choices. Clean. Sanitized. Phrased for redemption." Piper smiled, but her nails dug into the sides of her notebook. Later that week, she broke into his office. It was stupid, reckless, but she didn't care. She waited until the hallway lights flicked off and the center emptied. The janitor left his cart unattended. She slipped in with gloves on and a small flashlight tucked in her coat pocket. Her pulse beat in her throat like a war drum. The filing cabinet was locked. She popped it open with a thin piece of metal she'd practiced with back at the motel. Inside, documents, workshop outlines, and a notebook. Not the kind he used with the kids. This one was personal. The pages smelled of ink and old fear. She flipped through it in silence, each entry tight, controlled, until halfway through. That's where the walls cracked. "Sometimes I see his face. The boy in the crosswalk. I still don't know his name. I should have asked. Should have looked. But everything happened so fast. Too fast. I ran. God help me, I ran. They say you have to forgive yourself. But I don't think I've earned that. I tell the kids they can be more than their worst day. I don't believe it about myself." Piper's breath caught. He didn't know Daniel's name. After everything, he still didn't know. She took a photo of the journal entry and slipped the notebook back exactly as she'd found it. Her hands trembled, not with guilt, but with something colder. Cleaner. This wasn't over. She stepped out into the parking lot, the air cold against her face, and looked back at the glowing windows of the center. Caleb thought he was safe. Rebuilt. Redeemed. But Piper had already begun to stack the kindling. All she needed now was the spark. It began with a photo. Not the one from the journal, though that one still lived in a hidden folder on her phone. No, this was older. Grainy. Taken the night Daniel died. Piper had kept it in a shoebox under her bed for years, folded between court transcripts and sympathy cards she could never bring herself to throw away. The photo showed Daniel standing under a street lamp, grinning, arms slung around his friends. It was the last picture ever taken of him. Now it would become a weapon. Back at the motel, Piper spread out her materials on the desk like a surgeon laying out instruments. The photo. A flask of cheap whiskey. A forged note in Caleb's handwriting, painstakingly mimicked from forms he'd filled out for the youth center. And a printed report she altered from a previous DUI arrest, backdated, marked unfiled. She wore gloves. She triple-checked every detail. Mistakes would only weaken the blow. The plan wasn't to hurt him physically. No, that would have been too easy. Too fast. This would hollow him out slowly. She would make the world doubt him. The center that welcomed him, the kids who trusted him, the community that believed in second chances, they would all turn cold. She would make his redemption rot from the inside. She broke in again on a Thursday evening. She knew the routine now. The janitor took a smoke break at 8:15 p.m. sharp. Caleb left his office at 7:30 to lead a workshop in the gym. The lights in the east wing dimmed for energy conservation. The shadows were her camouflage. Inside his office, her hands moved with eerie calm. She tucked the photo into the middle drawer of his desk, the flask into the bottom one. The note, written in his own words of self-doubt, lifted from his journal. She pinned to the corkboard with a thumbtack, hidden just enough that someone would find it, eventually. Finally, she slipped the fabricated report between the stack of intake forms on his desk. As she stood back, surveying her work, a strange silence settled over her. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Just a flat, metallic stillness. Like the air before a storm breaks. She locked everything back as she found it and slipped out the side door into the night. The wind had picked up, scattering dry leaves across the sidewalk. Somewhere behind the building, a dog barked once and fell silent. Piper got into her car and sat there for a long moment, her hands on the wheel, not moving. She could have forgiven him. She knew that. Caleb had apologized, to the court, to society, to the faceless ghost of the boy he killed. And maybe he'd meant it. Maybe that mattered. But she wasn't here for truth. She was here for balance. For the part of her that had been screaming for 10 long years while the rest of the world moved on. For Daniel. She turned the key. The engine started. And just like that, the match was lit. The fallout came fast. 3 days after she planted the evidence, whispers began to circulate through the community center like smoke under a closed door. Caleb Royce had been suspended. No charges, yet, but the board cited credible concerns regarding behavior and transparency. The words were careful, measured, but Piper knew how accusations spread. No one cared about precision. They cared about infection. By the end of the week, his office had been emptied. The photo of Daniel, once hidden, had been found by a volunteer. The whiskey flask had surfaced in a cabinet Caleb hadn't opened in months. The forged note had already made its way to a parent's inbox. Sometimes I think I never changed at all. I just learned how to smile better. It looked like guilt. It read like a confession. And the lie worked. At first. Piper watched from a distance. Never too close, never too obvious. She drove by the center each morning and again at night, lingering just long enough to see the new faces replacing him. His name had been scraped from the door. His parking spot repainted. And yet something itched under her skin. A week later, she saw the article online. Youth counselor suspended amid misconduct allegations. It had a photo. Him. That same tired smile. No arrests. No charges. Just the stain. Her plan had landed. And still, it didn't feel like victory. Then the boy, Aaron, was rushed to the hospital. Piper saw the report on social media before it hit the local news. He'd taken pills. A lot of them. His parents said he was devastated by Caleb's suspension. Said Caleb was the only adult who had ever treated him like he mattered. That detail cracked something in her. She sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the screen, her coffee untouched on the windowsill. Outside, the sky was a clear, brutal blue. She hadn't thought about the kids. Only Caleb. Only the target. Not the ripples. She found herself driving without thinking, past the center, down side streets, until she pulled up in front of a pale blue house with a rusting mailbox. It was Caleb's. She waited until evening, when the porch light flicked on. Then she walked to the door and knocked. He opened it a few moments later. Hair messy. Eyes dull. He wore a hoodie and sweatpants, barefoot on the hardwood. There was no recognition in his face. Not at first. Then she said quietly, "It's me." A beat. A flicker. And then his expression shifted. "Piper," he said, like a puzzle snapping into place. Piper Hart. She didn't speak. She let the silence do the damage. "You're Daniel's sister," he said softly. She nodded. "I'm the one who destroyed your life." Caleb didn't move. His jaw tightened, but he didn't raise his voice. Didn't reach for anger. Instead, he let out a long, ragged breath. "I always wondered if I'd meet you." "I've already met you," she said. "In a courtroom. You didn't look sorry." "I was," he said. "I just didn't know how to show it yet." She didn't believe him. Not fully, but her voice cracked anyway. He was 17. I know. No, you don't. You never said his name. Not in court. Not in your parole letters. Not even in your journal. Something broke in Caleb's face then. A flicker of pain, real raw. I couldn't say it, he whispered. Because I didn't think I deserved to. Piper stood there, arms at her sides, every nerve lit up with conflict. She had wanted this confrontation to feel good. A clean, sharp ending. Instead, it felt like drowning. You've ruined everything, she said. Even this. I'm sorry, Caleb said. And it wasn't theatrical. It was quiet. Honest. But it was too late. She turned without a word and walked back to her car. Behind her, the porch light stayed on. A moth fluttered against the bulb, its wings throwing frantic shadows on the wall. Piper drove into the dark, but there was no peace in it. Only silence, and the first slow realization that revenge, once set in motion, doesn't stop where you want it to. The truth didn't take long to surface. A careless fingerprint. A security camera she hadn't seen. A volunteer who remembered her hanging around Caleb's office too often, asking strange questions, lingering after hours. One by one, the pieces of her careful deception began to unravel. She was arrested quietly. No sirens. No cuffs in the street. Just a knock on her motel door at 6:47 in the morning, and two officers who spoke like they were sorry it had come to this. They called it evidence tampering, fraud, and defamation. There was talk of restitution, of probation, of jail time. She didn't argue. What could she say? She sat in the back of the police cruiser with her hands folded in her lap and stared out at the same streets she'd driven a dozen times, hunting for the right moment to strike. It all looked different now. Smaller. Washed out. In the days that followed, the story broke online. But this time, it was her name in the headlines. Woman forges evidence against former inmate, faces criminal charges. Victim's sister accused of sabotaging community leader's reputation. There were photos. A mugshot. Her high school graduation picture pulled from an old memorial site for Daniel. The world had turned its eyes on her. And she felt the heat of it. Caleb, for his part, didn't press charges. In a press conference outside the community center, newly reopened, freshly painted, he stood behind a podium and said, without a hint of bitterness, I forgive her. I don't condone what she did, but I understand it. Grief doesn't move in a straight line. And I played a part in hers. Piper saw the clip in the county jail common room, surrounded by strangers in orange jumpsuits. No one recognized her. No one cared. But that one sentence, I forgive her, landed in her like a blade. Not because it was wrong, but because it was right, and she couldn't return it. She spent 43 days locked up. Then the court released her on probation, with mandatory counseling and community service. She was free to go, but nothing felt free about it. She didn't go home. She didn't know where home was anymore. Instead, she drove until she ran out of highway, slept in the back seat of her car for 2 nights, and then finally turned around and headed back to the place she'd avoided the most. The cemetery. It was overcast. The trees swayed gently in the summer wind. The grass had grown a little too long. The marble headstone was dusty. Piper knelt before it and let her palm rest on the cold stone. No words came for a long time. Then, quietly, I had the chance to forgive him, Danny. But I couldn't. The silence around her felt heavier than before. Not accusing. Not angry. Just final. She closed her eyes. Let her forehead rest against the name she'd never stopped loving. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the burn of anger. Only ash. Summer turned to fall. The days shortened. The air cooled. The leaves died in bursts of color. Piper didn't return to the motel. She didn't return to her old life either, if it could even be called that. The job she'd left behind was long gone. The apartment lease canceled. Her mother stopped answering calls, and Piper didn't blame her. Some losses are quiet. Some are earned. She found work sorting boxes in a thrift shop 2 towns over. Under a different name. No questions asked. No conversations. The manager was kind but distant, just how Piper preferred it. She spent her evenings alone. No more plans. No more fire. Just long walks down empty streets and hours lying awake in borrowed rooms, listening to the creak of old walls and the echo of her own breath. She hadn't seen Caleb since the day she knocked on his door. But she read about him. Occasionally. Quietly. His name had returned to the community center newsletter. He was back to leading workshops. His face appeared in an online interview about resilience after betrayal. The headline made her laugh. Not bitterly, just small and hollow. He had forgiven her. Publicly. Completely. And yet, she had not forgiven him. Not then. Not now. It wasn't that she couldn't. It was that something inside her refused to. Forgiveness had always stood like an unlocked door in her mind, slightly open, waiting for her to walk through. But she'd looked at that door every day and turned away. Not out of hatred, but out of conviction. Daniel was worth more than letting go. Or so she had told herself. One evening, as the wind carried the scent of coming rain, Piper stood outside the thrift store's back exit and looked up at the cloud-choked sky. The world felt both distant and painfully close. She thought about Daniel, not as a ghost, not as a victim, but as her brother. The boy who ran barefoot in summer. The boy who snuck snacks into the movies. The boy who would have hated who she had become. I thought justice would feel cleaner, she whispered aloud. But justice, when taken into your own hands, doesn't come clean. It comes with cuts. And scars. And the echo of a choice that will never unmake itself. In the end, she hadn't punished Caleb. She had just buried herself alongside Daniel. That night, she returned to her room and pulled a scrap of paper from her drawer. On it, she wrote a single sentence. I chose revenge when I could have chosen mercy. She folded it, slipped it into the spine of her journal, and left the page blank after it. Some things didn't need to be finished. They just needed to be faced.